Good morning and welcome to the 2020 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference Competitive Advantage Talks brought to you by Craft Analytics Group. My name is Lindsay Solitar and I'm a first-year student here at MIT Sloan, and it's my pleasure to introduce our next presentation, Numbers Don't Lie, using data in the weight room to enhance on-field performance. Please join me in welcoming our next presenter, Jeremy Jacobs, Assistant Strength and Conditioning Coach at LSU, to the stage.
Thank you. Hey guys, how you doing? Like she said, my name is Jeremy Jacobs. I'm a strength coach at LSU, and I'm going to kind of talk to you guys today about stuff that we've been using in the weight room as far as technology and how it's enhanced how we train our guys. I'm going to specifically speak mostly about our football team because that's who I train now solely, but really all of these principles can apply to any sport, any athlete that you train. So my role as a strength conditioning coach in college is a very unique role in the sense of we wear many hats, and it's something that I love and that I'm passionate about because of the NC2A and all the rules that go into how much time certain coaches can spend with the athlete and all that kind of stuff. The strength coach gets to spend more time with the athlete than anybody on staff. So I get a chance to really build relationships with these guys. I get to know them. And then as they progress in their career at LSU, I can really kind of hone in what they need on an individual basis to make sure that we're creating the best, most explosive, most powerful athlete and put them on the field. So our first slide here, okay, I'm going to steal an analogy from our head athletic trainer, Jack Marucci. So he explained this to me when I first got to LSU. I've been for 5 seasons now, and what we do as a staff in the off season is we build our players to be bigger, stronger, faster, to be the best versions of themselves. And everything that we do in our program is about putting the most productive product on the field, right? That's what I get paid to do. But what happens is we take this beautiful, shiny, new soda can and we hand it over to a staff, and they see it's like they get a brand new toy at Christmas. And they're so excited to get it because they have this great athlete that they recruited and they can't wait to watch what they do on the field. And then through practice and through games, they get crushed, right? And so as a staff, as a training staff, as a strength conditioning staff, we spend the rest of the season trying to knock out and smooth out all those dents on a week-to-week basis. Now, football is a little unique because it's a cyclical sport, meaning we know when we're playing every week, right? Other sports are different. Sometimes they play 3 games a week, sometimes they have a week off. Or football, I know for sure that we're playing every Saturday. So I can kind of peak my guys week to week and make sure that we're hitting the right performance metrics to make sure that we're putting the best product on the field. Now, how can we use technology and the data that comes with it to maybe keep that can smoother longer, right? And to not crush them and to give the coaching staff the best possible picture of that player's readiness on a week-to-week basis. So that's kind of what we've used our technology for. So we have three different primary pieces of technology that we use. Right? So we use a camera-based system that's located on every single rack in our weight room. So one thing, I'm blessed to work for a school that puts as much resources into this stuff that LSU does. So it gives me, as a strength coach, I really have no excuse not to be able to perform at the best level because I'm given every resource available. All right, so every rack in our weight room, we have 22 of them, has a camera on the rack that tracks the bar and tracks bar speed, right? It's a company that's called Perch. They use it that way. They call it that because the camera's perched up on the rack. And so now, anytime somebody is on the platform, I can track their performance metric barbell. So regardless of what I tell them to lift, it's about I can dictate and see how their body is feeling based on bar speed. Another piece of technology that we tie into that is force plate data. We have a company called Vald that we use, and so you see one of the player in the second picture there. Jumping on the force plate, it's 2 different plates, so I get metrics on both legs. So I can show if there's any asymmetries between right and left, if they push off with one, if they're more powerful with the other, their jump height. I'm going to go over that later. I'm going to give you guys kind of a more in-depth picture of what we use and the data that we look at from the force plate. And then we obviously have GPS units where we use polar, so we track heart rate, we track speeds, we track distance per minute, accelerations, decelerations, all those different metrics. And then we kind of take all of that and put it together and try to say and see how they correlate to each other and how do they actually change and perform and change metrics on the field. So I'm not interested in getting a bunch of data if it doesn't change what we do. I want to look at it on a week-to-week basis. I want to give it to my boss, Coach Tommy Moffitt, the head strength coach, and let him make decisions on the program based on the data and actually affect it week to week, workout to workout, and what we're doing. Okay, so what is velocity-based training, right? When I talked about the camera and tracking bar speeds and velocities on the bar, okay, what is it? So traditionally, the way that you train somebody in traditional periodization would be I have a testing phase. I test them. I figure out what's their 1 rep max. Let's just use back squat. They're going to back squat. They squat 200 pounds. Great. So now I provide percentages based off of that 1 RM. And I say, today we're going to lift 70% of your back squats. So you're going to lift this weight this many times. What that doesn't take into an account is the athlete's central nervous system. All right. So the key component with velocity-based training is I can now train the actual parameter that I want. So if you look at this chart up here, okay, based on the traditional periodization view of what percentage is on the bar, but now I have a velocity zone that the bar is tracking. And that camera spits its data out to a tablet that's attached to the rack. And so now the athlete is getting real-time data, and the coaches, of the bar speed. And so I can look at that and I can kind of gauge how well my athlete is doing that day, because I know based off of the information that we're getting where they should be at. Okay, and I'll show you kind of how we piece this together with more with the data and how we kind of use it to actually make corrections in our program. So, but velocity-based training is not new. It was originated in the Soviet Union. Then a coach by the name of Louis Simmons with Westside Barbell really made it popular in the 90s in the United States, where he was having his power lifters actually lift based on velocity rather than just load. But the biggest thing is now technology has caught up to velocity-based training and allowed us to use it on a more readily available basis. The old way was you had to attach gadgets to the bar. There were strings attached to those gadgets. I had to pull it out. I had to set it up. It was a pain in the ass, to be honest with you, every single day to get that up there. And so now, with it positioned at every rack, there's no strings, there's no equipment to move around. I can actually use it on a daily basis. And the best part is that now that information is collected from the perch and they send it directly into the cloud. And so I can go sit at my desk and I can pull all of that data up immediately after the workout and go back and analyze it. So I can paint a picture of where our guys are at on a daily basis now, way easier than it used to be. Also, with the force plate data, we kind of look at it and compare it together, because the force plate data will also give us metrics into how the athlete and the central nervous system is doing. So ultimately, as a strength coach, right, you have to identify the training parameters that you want for your sport. Every sport is different. Okay, so football is a power sport, right? So yes, I need you to get stronger, absolutely, and that's what those guys come there to do. Okay, but it's really about rate of force development. And so if I am not creating, if somebody's getting stronger, but it's not transferring on the field, then I would question what's the point, right? And so we have found out through research that we are actually not just tracking strength, we are tracking and we are trying to produce and chasing power. That's what we're trying to do. So if you've taken a basic physics class, right, you've seen a force velocity curve, okay? On the far left, obviously you have high force, low velocity. So in strength conditioning terms, if I have a really heavy load on the bar, I'm going to move it slower, right? If I have a really light load on the bar, if you look at the right, I'm going to move it faster, right? And so my whole goal as a coach is to get that curve and move it to the right. Can they move a heavier load faster? Okay, and what we've seen is that correlates to speed on the field. That's how we know that our training is transferring onto the field. And we get that through our GPS data then. Okay, our force plate we talked about. There's 4 different metrics that we look at our force plate. This is a lot of jargon on there. I'll kind of go through this quick. The RSI mod, okay, is what RSI modified is called. It stands for Reactive Strength Index Modified. Think of it how fast you jump to your peak height. So an athlete gets on the force plate, they make 3 jumps, okay, they jump, and then it spits out a number, and I know what those numbers correlate to as far as good, bad, needs improvement. It also spits out a raw data file, and so I can actually look at the curve of their force velocity curve on the force plate, and that will help tell me, I can tell you whether someone is a slow twitch or fast twitch athlete. I can tell you what kind of training do they need more of. Do they need more speed training, or they need more strength on the back end to even produce that force? Another metric we look at, concentric rate of power development divided by body mass. We divide it by body mass because if we didn't, our big dudes would always have the most power. So what that is looking at is how much force are they putting into the plate on the concentric phase of the jump. That's what we're looking at there. Okay? Eccentric braking force, rate of force development is how fast can they slam on the brakes when they load a jump, okay, which is also tied to strength. So if I see any type of deficiency in their eccentric braking force or their numbers going in the wrong direction, then I know that when we program going forward, we need to do more strength work because we're starting to lose that phase, okay? And then we also look at peak power divided by body mass. Just how much actual power are they putting into the ground, which has the velocity component to it, which is why it ties back into why we train velocity on the bar. Okay. Another thing with the velocity-based training, right, is someone's 1 rep max, right, based on your central nervous system. It can fluctuate 18% up or down on a daily basis. So if I bring you in and I test you on a back squat and you give me 100 pounds, that's your max, great, right? That's only what your central nervous system is able to produce that day. So if I have a 18% window plus or minus, I'm looking at a 36% change in that on a daily basis based on stress to your body. Now your body reacts to stress regardless if it's emotional stress or physical stress the same way. So maybe it's finals week for these guys. Maybe they broke up with their girlfriend. Maybe they had a really hard practice back to back to back. Maybe we had a long road trip. So maybe they're not recovered the same way. So now when I prescribe to them and say, you have to lift this amount of weight because it's 80% of your max, that might be 100% of their max that day. I don't know. But with velocity-based training, I can go and look at that and say, we're training at 0.8 meters per second today. So regardless of how you feel, you are going, everyone in the whole and on the team is training at the same percentage. I sent this picture up there because as technology has grown, all you see is a tablet and a small camera on our rack in our weight room. And so the footprint is very, very small. And it also, like I said, is a cloud-based system, so I get that information right away. The old way, it would spit it out on a little computer that was attached to an actual, like an old phone cord. And you would actually have to hand jam that data on your sheet and then try to go make sense of it. Where now, I get all of these metrics pushed to me immediately, and I can export them in an Excel file, and I can start making graphs and charts and start actually using the data. That was the hardest part we had. We would have, in the old way, we would have to look at it, and we could only kind of look at that day's data, and then it would all be gone. Where now, I can go back and trace our entire in-season program and look at how did we start performing. And how did we start? How did we finish? Where were we at week to week? Okay, so let's look at some of the data that we get. Okay, so this is all coming from the perch and the cameras and based on velocity. So now, some of these charts and graphs are really, really kind of hard to read, obviously, out there. But what that top chart is showing me is what was the average speed on the bar, at what percentage load was on the bar that day, the average amount of reps that we perform at that percentage, and then the total number of reps that we have performed at that percentage. So now I can look at an in-season program. I can see where we lift the most, where we lift the best, where we produce the most power, at what percentages. Okay? If you look at the bottom graph, it looks very, very similar to the force velocity curve, because that's what we have been able to start creating now with this data. We now have enough data in the system that we can actually build individual force velocity profiles on our players. Okay? So I can scroll over to a certain data point on that curve, and it will tell me for a certain player A, if I want them lifting at 0.8 meters per second, then they need to have 62.5% on the bar, right? So it gives me a starting point of where they should be at. And then also, if I go and put 62.5% of their 1 rep max on the bar and they're moving it slower, then I know their central nervous system is not fully recovered from whatever stress was put on it, and I need to take weight off that bar. Okay, because I want to reach that 0.8 meters per second in the training, because it correlates to power or whatever we want that metric to be, like we showed in that earlier chart. Okay, vice versa. If they're moving the bar way faster, now as a coach, I get to take advantage of them feeling good that day. And so now I'm training them optimally. I'm never going to overtrain them, and I'm definitely not going to undertrain them. So we've been able to use this to actually create a legitimate individual-based program, athlete to athlete. So yes, we give them numbers on a sheet that say this is your starting point, but we're allowing their central nervous system to actually dictate what gets put on the bar. Okay? So here's this is some of the charts that I produce and give to the head strength coach, and so he can make some actual programming decisions based on this. This is what like a snapshot of a day would look like. So on here I have your average mean velocity, I have your average weight on the bar, I have the peak power, because what we're chasing, this is in season now, we are chasing peak power, right? I want to know at what percentages do we move the bar the fastest and produce the most power. What we found through our research is the strength movements, and I'm talking like squat, bench, deadlift, our peak power starts diminishing anywhere between 60 and 65%. Okay, so you might think by moving a heavier load, I'm going to produce more power, but the velocity slows to a point where you are no longer doing that. Okay, on your Olympic movements, your clean and jerk, your snatch, all that kind of stuff that we use for power. We're an Olympic-based program, so we do all of those lifts. We see that peak power starts to diminish between 80 and 85%, depending on the athlete's technique. So we know percenting and prescribing-wise, when we're in season and we're trying to get these guys to produce as much power as they can, given every Saturday when they're on the field, we want to make sure that we're training that in the weight room, because what we're doing to their central nervous system and putting that and having them train that modality is going to carry over on Saturdays, is what we've found. Now, there's genetics that play in a role of all this, fast twitch, slow twitch guys, so that we're going to make some tweaks and changes, but I give an overall view to my boss so he can sit down and look at this and say, all right, next week, you know what, we need to go back down. Or I actually had guys PR on certain lifts in the middle of in-season, meaning they're getting stronger. They've lifted the most weight they've ever lifted in a certain exercise right in the middle of a season, because they walked in that day. I said, you need to lift the bar at X amount of weight or X speed, and they were able to exceed that speed. So I couldn't put enough weight on the bar to actually get them to slow down to that speed, and then boom, they hit a PR that they'd never hit in their life. Okay, so how do we piece this all together? What does it look like? So this is just kind of two movements. This would be an example of later in the week, we have a power clean and a bench press. This is in-season training, okay? So what this is, you're looking at a week-to-week basis of, if you notice, every column has a different color. That color correlates to the team that we're about to play that week, all right? Also, there's percentages below there. I know it's really small print, you can't see it. But there's percentages based under every column, so I know what percentage was on the bar for the average of that speed, or for the average for that exercise. And then on top is the velocity in meters per second, and what was the team average that we moved that at. And so we knew for certain weeks, right, for instance, right, so I coach at LSU, we're gonna go play Alabama, it's a ginormous game, so we wanna make sure that we're peaking our guys right for that week. All right, so we want to make sure we're moving the bar as fast as we can, so we took a little bit of weight off that bar that week, and we made sure that they moved it as fast as they could. We had certain games where we knew going into that week, we're going to win this game, okay? So therefore, maybe we train a little harder that week in the weight room because regardless of how my guys feel, we're going to win that game, if that makes sense. Okay, the two bottom metrics, the RSI mod and your concentric rate of power development, those are two force plate metrics. So we would directly look at how is our force plate data increasing or how is it improving based on how we're training. And so if we saw a dip in our force plate data, we'd go back, we'd look at our percentages, we'd look at our velocities on the bar and say, too heavy this week, it had a detriment. Or, oops, practice was really, really hard yesterday. We looked at the GPS data, practice was super hard, so therefore we need to pull back in what we are doing. And so if you look at the trend lines, this is the biggest takeaway. The trend lines are, we jumped to our peak height and we produced more power into the plate every week as the season went on. So we ascended, and so we peaked right at the end of the season and played our best football when it mattered, right? That's the whole point of this whole thing. So that's how we have used the data to actually help us make decisions in the weight room and what we're doing, okay? Because ultimately what it does is it helps guide our decisions. I no longer have to guess. I don't have to use my quote unquote coach's eye and say, oh, he looked good today or he looked bad. I have real data that comes in that I look at and shows, that guy feels great, or we need to watch this guy for a little bit and make sure he recovers, okay? We kept the can smoother longer in the season, right? And the most impressive thing that I can tell you is, according to our GPS data, we ran our fastest speeds on the field of practice in our final week leading up to the national championship game against Clemson. So we ran our fastest speeds at the end of the season when the most was on the line, right? And that was something we kind of looked back at the entire program of our in-season and thought, all right, so we're actually onto something. This data means something to us, and it's really helping guiding our decisions to make sure that we're putting the best product on the field. So that's all I have. I'm open to any questions anybody has. I think we have 3 minutes according to this clock, yeah? You need a mic? Yeah, sorry.
Very impressive presentation, thank you. Do you use this approach to other sport, non-football, within LSU?
Yes, so kind of the way college sports is going right now is, it seems like more and more sports are getting separated. At LSU, it's very fortunate in the fact that, yes, it's a football operations building and it's the football weight room, but we have 5 other sports that train there, which means we have 5 other sports that have access to all that technology. And I use it with all of our women's volleyball team uses it, our baseball team uses it, our women's soccer team uses it, our beach volleyball team uses it. And so you get to choose, or you kind of, as you learn those sports, you can know what is the training metric that I need to look at for that sport, and then assist your program to make sure that you're meeting those needs. Volleyball is very similar to football. It's a power sport, right? The girls need to be able to produce power. And so it kind of, they would get trained in a similar manner to how we would train a football player. Anybody else?
The time.
Yeah.
Love the presentation. I've heard the analogy of strength training being a double-edged sword, and that, you know, guys can really get hurt if they're not doing things correctly.
Absolutely.
How much emphasis do you put on screening, and do you collect any screening data before you start moving these numbers up with certain exercises that
Good point. So if you saw on the original graph that kind of showed the velocities and the zones they correlate to, one of them was called starting strength, where if somebody comes in to me and they've maybe never lifted before, then I need to teach them. We're a technique-first based program, so I want to make sure that you move well before I ever worry about speeds or loads on the bar. And that's kind of when you come in as a freshman to LSU, that first summer, you are in your own group by yourself as far as just freshmen. And we take the time as a whole staff, we just train freshmen in that group to make sure that they meet the requirements, right? And they go through a screening process both with our med staff and with us to make sure that they can attain the positions we want before we ever load them, if that makes sense. But that's a great question, yeah. Anybody else?
How do you handle the break between the regular season and bowl season? Is there
That's great. That's a great question. So this year was weird. The college football schedule is now we finished our regular season. We went right into a the SEC championship game. Then we had 3 weeks off. Then we had a Peach Bowl, and then we had 2 weeks off, and then we had the national championship. So what we did, we looked at the force plate data, and we made sure that if there was a metric that we needed to work on, maybe our eccentric braking or our strength was going down. So now we had some time where we took it to like, hey, we need to put a little more load on the bar and make sure that we're getting some strength work back in our program because we know that we don't have to peak and be super powerful for 3 weeks, right? So it kind of let us take a step back, work on some fundamentals, and then as we got closer to competition again, we kind of went right back into what we did. We didn't do anything different, if that makes sense. I think we're out of time. I know there's a talk right after me. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to, I'll step outside. I'll answer anybody's questions. But I appreciate your time. Thank you.